What up, watch peeps? Seems like what you're supposed to do this time of year is put out a best watches of the year video, so I picked 5 of mine. Unfortunately, I think most of these are actually sold out, but they should be available again at some point in the future. I didn't want availability to be a factor, as these are just supposed to be some of my favorite watches of the year. A couple of these are actually still in my collection, so maybe we can take a look at those at the end if there's time. Alright, let's get to it. I'm Pete, and we are Chillin' with Watches. First up is the Traska Summiteer. Traska is one of my favorite micro brands. I've owned both of the watches they've released so far. The Summiteer was just about a perfect watch, and I'm going to claim temporary insanity for having let this one go. I will be rectifying this situation though. I'll either be buying one of the new Summiteers when they become available again, or one of the new 36mm commuters that are coming out. So the dimensions on the Summiteer were ideal for me at 38mm, only 10mm thick. Going over the specs, it had everything you could ask for. The movement, the sapphire, drilled lugs, screw down signed crown, had the water resistance. Even the bracelet was one of my favorite things on it. It was a 20mm lugs, tapering down to 16 to a very simplistic but really well built done clasp. Has their awesome logo on it. It even had perlage finish on the inside. Very thin, just a fantastic watch. I'm definitely going to be adding either one of these or that commuter back to my collection. Next up is the Newmark 71. This one was a bit of an unsung hero. And that I think it flew completely under the radar and was a very underrated, very undervalued, and from another great micro brand company that I've also owned every watch they make. So I'm talking about the Newmark 71 Diver here. It's a beautiful design, literally taken straight from their brand's archive. The size was fantastic at 39.5mm across the bezel, 38.5mm across the case, and 13mm thick. That's including the domed sapphire crystal. It had 200 meters of water resistance, screw down crown, sapphire, all the good stuff. Miyota 9039 movement. One of my favorite features on this watch was the 60-click ball bearing bezel. It had a sapphire loomed insert, and it had one of the best feeling bezels of any micro brand, of any brand I've ever held. This one also had a very cool, very unique bracelet, 20mm lugs, tapering down to 18, but just a really cool link pattern. And lastly, the most amazing thing about this watch was the lume. It had X1 all over the place and lit up like a torch. Next up is a watch from Zelos, and this is the Swordfish 40mm. Now Zelos always puts out a great array of colorways for their watches, and the Swordfish was no exception. Unfortunately, like I said, these are all sold out, and I hate proposing a watch you can't even go out and buy, but they do pop up on Watch Recon, and hopefully, due to their success, they will come back. The meteorite dials are cool. I own a meteorite dial hammerhead, but in the Swordfish, I had this teal. These were wonderfully proportioned watches. The build quality was fantastic, solid, just they felt quality in your hand. Obviously a 40mm case, but only 12 thick. Had a very edgy, almost samurai case design. Killer dials, as always. Obviously a very modern, very aggressive look, but that's what I like about Zelos. They aren't chasing vintage looks. We have enough brands doing that. Maybe. The bracelet was also really nice on these. It had small, flat links, chamfered edges. They didn't have the latest version of the quick adjust clasp that I love so much, but I bet if these come back, they probably will. This was just a great offering from Zelos in a very wearable size. Can't wait to see these come back. Next up is one of the watches that is still in my collection and was such a surprise to me. This is the Woolbrook. I did not realize how much I would like this watch when I picked it out. Now they have these new chronographs just being delivered now, actually, and they're thankfully mecha quartz. I'm not a fan of the Seagull chronograph movement that some micro brands are using now. I guess I'm not much of a chronograph guy in general, but if I do go chrono, I want a mecha quartz or a solar. But the watches I'm talking about here today are their first release, and these are available in a few different formats, from an acrylic automatic to a sapphire mecha quartz, all three-handers. All of these are cool, but I had this steel bezel colorway in the mecha quartz. So these models have the sweep seconds quartz movement, which I think is really cool. Only downside being they have a 2-year battery life. Has a flat sapphire crystal, a fantastic 40mm case that I would say wears small. It doesn't feel like a 40 on wrist at all. I got mine on the bracelet, which is a fully brushed beads of rice. In my review, I talked about how awesome this bracelet is. It really goes from casual to something you could wear out to dinner. Not a dress watch, obviously. But they have 100 meters of water resistance with just a simple push-pull crown that you're not really going to have to mess with since it's a quartz movement with no date. It's a 120-click world timer bezel, which you know my thoughts on world timers, but in this instance, I like it more for its looks than I do for its functionality. This watch has ended up being one of my favorites in my collection, and I find myself wearing it quite often, and I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon. Last on the list, or next on the list, is the Seiko 5 Dress KX. And this was another one that was a surprise for me. Another watch that's also still in my collection. When these first came out, I criticized them for looking just like a modded SKX with a smooth bezel, but they are much more than that. And not just because the small bezel results in a much better proportioned watch. These wear fantastic. They're 40mm cases, but again, they don't feel like a 40 on your wrist. I'd say they wear more like a 38. How wonderfully these wear is really my favorite thing about this watch and why it's still in my collection. So I went with the NATO version because, like I mentioned before, they come with a brushed bezel, which is a little more sporty look that I prefer. But also I really like the gilt dial version. I wish that came with a brushed bezel. So besides the 40mm case, these come in quite thin as well, at about 11.5mm, with a lug-to-lug of only 44.5. Super wearable. I really like the gray dial I went with because I thought it was a little different, but I don't think there's a bad choice in the bunch. The black, the blue, they're all good. I think with this watch, you get a watch that is both sporty and has bright big lume plots and hands, but on a bracelet or leather, it can also look kind of dressy. Not a dress watch, but you could dress it up. So these run the 4R36, hacking and hand winding. They also have just a push-pull crown, which is perfectly fine for 100 meters of water resistance you get with these. I think that makes them quite versatile. You don't have to be afraid of getting them wet. Just a really great all-around watch. So there you have it, my top 5 of the year. I think there's some underdogs in there, not all the usual suspects, although there might be a couple of those. Some of these you knew would be great, some were pleasant surprises, but I don't think any of them would be a disappointment if you added them to your collection. What are you guys' thoughts? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know what was your favorite watch of the year. Before I let you go, sneaker check. Trying to get some mileage out of these fire reds. Alright, that's it. I'm out. If it's not too much trouble, like, subscribe, and come back next time. Peace.